Injuries are in full force for the New Orleans Saints. What's the latest with Derek Carr? What's going on with the defensive line? We're going to jump into all that right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
What is up, Who Dat Nation? Welcome back inside another edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. I'm your host, Chris Rosvogel, and as always, we're brought to you by Scott Fickner Injury Lawyers and by Crystal. Joining me for this edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast is Saints reporter Jeff Nowak, works for Odyssey Sports and also WWL Radio. Jeff, how's everything going, man? How's the heat down there at this point of the year?
It was hot today, man. I'm glad we're doing this now because this guy needed to host a podcast in like 45 minutes. So I need to reset my brain, because when you stand outside in that heat for 90 minutes, you don't feel like a human after a while. But thankfully, we don't have to deal with that during training camp this year. This is really all we have, so I can't complain too much.
That's fair enough. So I'll just jump right into it. Obviously, now that I feel like this is the start of football. Once we start seeing OTA videos, I feel like that's when everyone starts getting optimistic. And look, I know it could turn into pessimism in September, but this is the time to feel good. And I know one of the early stories so far, and I know Saints fans are maybe harder on this player than most, would be Derek Carr, but new system so far seems efficient. I know it's tough to put so much stock into practices like this where, everyone's not flying 100 miles an hour. But what have you seen from Derek Carr? And what are kind of the positives, whether it's the leadership attributes or just the way he kind of looks in a new system? What's your early evaluation?
Yeah, I've said this on our last podcast. It's like, this is optimism season. Like, if you can't be optimistic now, it's about you. It's not about the team, because all the team can do is try to make it better, which is what you're trying to do right now. So yeah, I mean, for Derek Carr, he's doing what you need him to do. I'm not going to overplay. Yeah, he looks great. He does look good, but he should look good, right? He's going into year 11. He's picking up an offense that should be simpler than the one he picked up last year, and he's executing it well. He went 7 for 7 in team drills today. He does look like he's navigating things well. He does look like he's hitting the right notes with teammates. One guy who's in his corner that, I don't know was the case this time last year. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, is Demario Davis. Very, very vocally in support of Derek Carr. And, that's kind of what you need, I think, to really own a locker room, is to have the leaders on the defensive side of the ball kind of in lockstep with the quarterback. And that's a good thing. That's not indicative of everybody, but that's a good start. And for Derek, I do think that he needs to get off to a good start this year, because it's going to get loud fast. If he comes out and struggles in week 1 and they kind of scrape past the Panthers, and then they get kind of boat raced in week 2 and week 3, there's not going to be a ton of grace given for that from the fan base. So we'll see. But for now, I think things look like you need them to look. Again, like you mentioned, it's OTAs. To me, the season doesn't really start until training camp. This is kind of like, this is more like summer camp. It's like you're just kind of going to do stuff. It's not really what you're going to see when the season comes around, but it is something to kind of sink your teeth into and get started. But for Derek, for what Derek needs to do, I think he's done it so far.
Yeah, absolutely. And Derek Carr's situation is interesting, because I know last season didn't maybe start statistically the right way. And then I go look back at the final 5 games, and I'm like trying to figure out, is it fool's gold? Is it a sign of things to come? I have no idea. I hope it's more so the latter and he builds off that. But to your point, there's definitely going to be a lot of pressure on him. And obviously the pressure is also going to be on the guys blocking him. And one of the biggest stories is most likely going to be Trevor Penning going from left to right. And I know that's someone that you guys got to speak with today. So I know it's probably a process, right? I think for him, it's probably tough because the spotlight's on him. So every single snap, I'm sure people are going to wonder what happens with Trevor Penning, even if it's just practice at this point. Did he win the rep? Did he lose it? How did he look? But what are your early impressions, more so maybe on how he's handling the shift, maybe from a mental standpoint, at least what you guys have heard from him in the locker room? Does it seem like it's a positive transition for Trevor Penning so far? Where's that at?
Yeah, at this point, I try not to dive into like winning, losing reps, because until you're in pads, you really don't get a good picture of what that looks like. Now, you can screw up, and you'll note that, he had a few mistakes today that, it would look bad in pads or not, right? He jumps off sides or false start, whatever. There was one where he just whiffed on a block and he had to tackle a guy. But, this is the time where you're okay with that, right? This is the time where you're learning. What I will say for Trevor is, and this is probably why, if you cover him, you're a little more in his corner than if you're just going to watch him, because I do appreciate his approach. I do appreciate his mentality. He did a kind of a group interview, and then I chatted with him afterward. And one of the things that I do appreciate about him is you get these questions, and basically the subtext of every question is, "Man, you really sucked last year. Why was that?" And there's a couple ways you can go with that, right? And I think he does handle it well. Like, he appreciates that he wasn't good enough. I think he was very frustrated with the situation in terms of where he was and how he was performing, but also kind of the coaching, I think. And you have to be honest about where the coaching was. I don't think it was good enough on the offensive line last year. And so that's where you look at John Benton, you look at kind of how that situation can improve around him. And we'll see. I do like the idea of having him play next to Caesar and kind of a veteran, as opposed to trying to throw him next to Nick Saldiveri or whoever is at left guard, because that's kind of a wild card. I do think that he's going to have his struggles, and you're going to have to let him play through his struggles. But that's what you would have liked to see last year, and you just didn't, because that's what you have to do with a young player. Taliesin Fuaga is going to struggle on the left side, but you can't give up on a guy because he's struggling. You have to coach him through that, and I think that's what didn't happen. So, I'm rooting for Trevor. I think like the physicality is there, like the athleticism is there. It's all between his ears and it's all in his feet, right? It's a technical issue. I asked him if he's played right tackle in his life. He says he's done it. He's never played there in a game. So he doesn't see it as a big switch. It's kind of, it really hasn't played a ton at the NFL level at left tackle to say, oh, he's set in his ways. So if you're going to do it, you should do it now. He said that, the first time it got broached for him, he had a call with Dennis Allen in March where they kind of did that whole fresh start thing, right? We've heard that said a few times. That call was when that really kind of was set in stone. It's like, hey, we're going to move forward. We're going to make some changes, and we want you to feel like, this is a fresh start for you. It was brought up that he might switch sides, but it wasn't really official. He didn't find out officially until not right before OTAs, but in between, I would guess, rookie minicamp and OTAs, when they got to look at Taliesin on the left side and felt comfortable with it and were able to move forward with it. So this is all very, very quick for him in terms of, this wasn't the plan coming out of last season. This was kind of the plan as it arrived when they decided that Taliesin could play on the left side. And so, yeah, it's going to be a big question all offseason. One thing that I did notice today was you had Fuaga kind of doubling up on reps at left tackle. And I think the idea there is to kind of put his development at warp speed as much as possible to give him all the reps he can handle. On the right side, you had Landon Young taking those second team reps at right tackle. And I think that's kind of an indicator that, he would be the break class in case of emergency situation here, that where you have a guy that you feel like could step in at right tackle and you're going to have him prepared. But again, we're so early in the process. We just don't know. Either way, it's going to be something we watch the whole way.
Yeah, and you mentioned Penning being next to Ruiz and how that could be a benefit. I kind of find it ironic too, because I remember, and look, I was one of those fans back then who would be frustrated with Ruiz not developing, and then you fast forward to now, and we're like, okay, McCoy and Ruiz, we trust. Everyone else, we got to figure out what the question marks are. So maybe it's a similar situation there. You mentioned Fuaga and also Nick Saldiveri. I'm curious, what have you seen from Nick Saldiveri so far? Because I know there's so much talk about Penning and so much talk about Fuaga, but this is a guy with a lot of versatility coming out of college, and we didn't see pretty much anything of him last year, but is there something there? Does it seem like early on, at least whether it's the way the Saints speak about him or just the way he's being coached up, where it feels like they're hoping he's the left guard of the future? What are kind of the early signs? I know we mentioned, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket and put so much stock in May, but does it feel like there's at least a pretty good chance that he could be a left guard and a serviceable one?
I mean, I think they certainly are hopeful that he can be their left guard of the future, or at least, of the next couple seasons, however that goes. It's not like you drafted him in the first round where you feel like, oh, he's got to be that guy. That was the case with Caesar. And that's why it was very frustrating to watch Caesar not walk in and be that immediate day one impact player, which you kind of have to be to justify a first round pick at the interior line. Let's be real. With Nick, I think there is a little bit more grace given that he was a fourth round pick. Last year, he was mostly healthy. It was a redshirt year for him. So the goal was to let him develop. And then this year, now that, Hurst has retired, I don't know if you planned for Hurst retiring, but they were aware of it early in the offseason. They let Andres Pete walk if you didn't feel comfortable with the left guard situation. I think there was an element of Andres P wanting to get a fresh start, but they also probably could have changed his mind with a contract that had a certain number in it, and they didn't do that. So I think you go into this season saying, hey, Nick, we're going to give you a shot to win that job, full well knowing that you have veterans and you have a rookie left tackle. So in order for him to win that job, I think once you get to training camp, because right now it's just like, hey, we're going to give this guy reps and see what he's got. Once you get to training camp, I think you're going to take a closer look and say, what gives this offensive line the best chance to succeed right now? Who are the 5 best players right now? And I wouldn't be surprised if maybe he gets preempted by a Shane Lemieux or a Lucas Patrick or someone like that. But he's going to get a chance to compete for that job. And that's a good sign. That's what you need to see, because if you feel like he can compete for that job, then worst case scenario, you go in with him as the backup and maybe he does take over, even if he isn't the guy, because I just feel very uncomfortable personally for Derek Carr's safety if you're asking him to trust a rookie left tackle and essentially a rookie left guard, and then what amounts to, a 30-year player, but a guy who really hasn't played on the right side. You're asking a lot of a guy that can't really move around that much. And, he can move, but, if you want to torpedo a season before it starts, you give a 33-year-old quarterback no offensive line. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to watch throughout camp. I'm only saying this to kind of set the expectation that him not winning that job is not the end of the world, because you're just kind of seeing that progression and him presenting in such a way where you would feel comfortable if it came down to him playing is a step forward for him. So I think that's a position that you're going to watch. You're going to watch the depth behind him too. You're going to see these UDFAs. Kyle Hergel, I think, is a guy who's going to factor into that mix, right? Justin Herron on the outside. We haven't really seen Oli Udo yet or Mark Evans. Both those guys are dealing with injuries. There was 14 guys absent today. So it's going to be something that at mandatory minicamp, when hopefully a much higher number of people are there, at least the healthy players, we'll get a better read on what the actual rotation is. But for now, I think Nick is definitely a guy that they're hoping can step into that role.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. It seems almost like, I don't want to say sink or swim because that might be too drastic, but there's this great unknown where I am in the same boat where it's like, I don't know, I'm a little concerned for Derek Carr. And then also, if I'm going to play the optimist in May, it's like, well, what if some of these young guys end up being, absolutely great players at the next level? We'll see what happens. But you mentioned expectations and kind of tempering them and how it's important. When the Saints drafted Spencer Rattler, I get why there's a bunch of, hype, because I don't think you really get a 5th round quarterback with maybe 1st round arm talent that often. And that seemed to be the case with him. And when the pick happened, I thought, hey, value's great. It's, you always take a shot on quarterbacks at that point when you can. And for the Saints, obviously it's only really a couple weeks in for him and he's going to learn and grow. But what have you seen so far in terms of maybe the backup battle? Because I know everyone was so quick to say Spencer Rattler could be the future, and who knows, he might be, but at the same time, he needs time to learn. I mean, he's going from college to pros. That's not easy. And Jake Haener, on the other hand, it's almost kind of been forgotten, but I think something about Jake, and I think about it in the preseason from last year, he seems a little bit of a gamer in the sense that I think he probably maybe welcomes a competition that maybe fans might have slept on that fact. So what have you kind of seen from those two quarterbacks? And I know there's been a lot of talk about Rattler maybe just getting his feet under him and getting used to it, but what have you seen from those two?
Yeah, I got a chance to talk to Jake for a good bit today. And, one of the questions I had for him was, he seems very confident in year 2. And how much more confident are you today than you were walking in here as a rookie? And it's a different world going into year 2 versus going into year 1. And that's one of the reasons I felt it important to tell people to pump the brakes on Spencer Rattler, not because I don't like Spencer Rattler, but because you're being unreasonable with your expectations for what a rookie will be able to do in his first career offseason. He's a 5th round pick, and you could say, okay, maybe he's a 2nd round talent, but even a 2nd round talent, you would say, okay, guys, let's see how he can develop at the NFL level. And what we've seen thus far is Jake looks like a guy who is kind of adjusted to NFL speed and is able to make decisions much more quickly. He's able to process more quickly. And Spencer looks like a guy who's rushing and pressing, and he's been late with a lot of throws. I mean, he's struggled. And the funny thing is, I'm talking about him more than I probably should be when you talk about a 5th round pick, but it's because people are so excited about him. So I have to analyze him and tell people what he's been doing. And what he's been doing is struggle, which is not unreasonable for a 5th round pick in his first 2 OTA sessions, but that's what we've seen. And So, I a couple of years ago, and this isn't me comparing Spencer to Ian Book, but I kind of came up with an Ian Book rule, which is I'm not going to overly criticize someone in his rookie offseason because that's unfair. So I'm only going to bring up things that he does when he's like going in the right track. I'm not going to talk extensively about mistakes because every rookie makes mistakes. That said, I think the concerning thing to me right now for Spencer is his biggest struggles have come in the 7-on-7 sessions, which there's no pass rush. It's all about decisions, timing, and accuracy. He's taken 8 of those reps. 2 of them were completions. One of those completions was probably a bad throw that Adam Prentice rescued. 2 of them have been intercepted. 4 others probably could have been intercepted. He had another interception in 11-on-11s today, which I kind of put on Bub Means a little bit because he didn't fight back to the ball, but it was a bad decision. And that's right now where Spencer is. And, one of the mistakes you can make at this point is forgetting that there's so much time for this kid to figure out these mistakes, correct them, and look a lot better, a month, 2 months from now in training camp. But we're going to focus on everything that's right in front of us right now, and it's easy to overreact. He's not ready right now, and that's okay. What Spencer needs to do is kind of put one foot in front of the other and get better every day and force this team to keep him on the roster, right? Because right now, if I had to pick a backup quarterback, there's no question I'm going with Jake Haener because he looks like an NFL quarterback right now. What Spencer needs to make sure is the case is by the end of training camp, the Saints feel like we can't stash this kid on the practice squad because he's going to get claimed. And we have to keep him on the roster. Because next year, who knows, right? Next year, you want to look at him and say, just like Jake this year, hey, this kid looks a whole lot different than he did on day one last year. But I do appreciate Jake's approach. He worked with John Gruden in the offseason. He kind of talked about the offense in general. It's a lot easier to pick up for young players. It made a lot of sense to Drew back in 2009 or 2006 when he was learning it. That doesn't mean it's going to make sense to a rookie in 2025. And I think that he's just having a much easier time picking up this system, even though it's his second system in 2 years. And you can see that on the field. He's made a couple mistakes too. He had a couple rough throws today, but he just looks like when you get him out there, he's ready to be that backup right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, and you mentioned it, I think the fact that you guys have seen that type of improvement in Jake is also more cause for people to be patient with Spencer. And we'll see. I almost like that there's that, I don't want to say, people being overly optimistic, but there is that excitement because I felt like coming into the draft, it almost, I don't want to say Saints fans were just disinterested, but it seems like it's kind of been on the uptick, which is great. And I'm excited for these preseason games, which I usually often don't feel that way. Like, I don't think, while I'm watching the game, I go, I can't wait to see the second and third string guys, but I literally can't wait to see how they play in the preseason. So that's going to be exciting. Before I let you go, I just have 2 quick questions for you, Jeff. The first one, on the defensive side of the football, losing Tanoh to the torn Achilles. Obviously that's not ideal. Not that Tanoh was going to be a starter per se, but this is a guy that I think is always reliable when you kind of put him in the games. And I like his versatility. So with that, you're kind of relying on players who I think there's no question about the talent on the Saints defensive line, but I think there's a lot of question about the availability, whether it's Chase Young or whether it's Peyton Turner. And even for Isaiah Foskey, we don't even know what he is at the NFL level yet. So for you, when you hear about that injury, what's kind of your initial reaction and what it means for that defensive line?
Yeah, I think you kind of hit it right there. It's like one of the things, like Tanoh was never going to change the game extensively, but you knew what to expect, right? You knew what you were going to get out of him. He was very consistent. He also gave you a really intriguing option of just shifting inside and rushing on passing downs. He looked really good in combination with Brian Brzee last year. I thought that was a really nice package that, I don't know if they're going to eliminate it or they're going to try to find someone else who can fill that, but that's a much tougher thing to do than a lot of people realize when you're giving up that much size in the interior. So yeah, I mean, I think it creates opportunity is what I'll say right now. That's the May optimism take. If you had to lose him, you'd rather it happen at this point so you can find replacements and you can kind of mix and match and see what you have in Isaiah Foskey. And between Foskey and Turner, they're question marks, but they're 2 completely different questions. Which one is, can you stay on the field? The other one is, can you compete at the NFL level? And I don't think we have the answer for either. I actually think when Peyton's been on the field, I've been intrigued with how he's performed. I actually think there's a talented player in there, and the issue genuinely has been health and just unfortunate injuries. Like, we're not talking about, nagging injuries that, you could rub some dirt on it and get out there. We're talking about like, just significant foot injuries and shoulder injuries and all these things, like the turf toe injury he had, I is one of my strongest held takes is that they should change the name of turf toe to something that sounds as just damaging as it is, because it makes it sound like, oh, you have a toe injury. It's like, no, his big toe was basically torn off his foot and he had to have surgery to repair it. Like, that's the type of injury we're talking about. And you'd like to say, hey, well, you can do something else. What can you do? Anyway, but I think what the Tanoh injury does is it takes away a concrete answer that you had on the defensive line, and it leaves you just more reliant on the question marks in Chase Young, Isaiah Foskey, Peyton Turner, who you feel like have high ceilings, but you just don't know what they are. So yeah, I think that's where you're at. They can overcome it if they can get a representative effort out of those guys. And the thing with Peyton is, last year I was like, man, he got through an entire training camp. What a good sign. And then he played in week 1 and he got hurt and he was done until week 18. So you're going to be there the entire year being like, oh, he played well, but is he going to make it to next week? So I don't know, but it's frustrating. And the other thing is just Tanoh's just a really good guy. Like, I like Tanoh a lot. He's a good locker room guy. He worked a lot with Brian Brzee and kind of this pass rush group last year. I know Todd Grantham likes him. So it's a loss. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. Also, I'm with you, by the way, on Peyton Turner. I always tell people I'm not like I can't tell you like crystal ball what the numbers would be if he played healthy for a full season, but I've never watched Peyton Turner and go, man, he can't play. He just can't play literally from a health perspective. But like every time he's on the field, I feel like there's at least 1 to 2 plays before he gets hurt where I'm like, oh my God, this guy looks amazing. And then unfortunately that happens. So my last question for you real quick, Jeff, I know it's early, but is there a player who's maybe surprised you so far? I know, for example, one guy a lot of people have been talking about was Michael Jacobson, so maybe that could be it. But who's been that guy for you that, maybe you just keep a closer eye on after what they've been doing the first couple weeks?
Yeah, there's a few on defense that I'm interested in. Millard Bradford had a really good day today. He had a couple interceptions, although he did get kind of reamed out by a special teams coach at one point, which is like, it's one of those situations where, like, yeah, the interceptions are great, but you're going to make the team on special teams. So that's probably more impactful than the interceptions at the end of the day. But the guy on offense that has impressed me, he showed up at rookie minicamp. He was the best rookie out there because he wasn't actually a rookie. Is Jordan Mims, the running back from Fresno State. I talked to Jake Haener about him today because they were teammates at Fresno State. And I would say the play of the day was a rail route where Jake just threw it up and he went up and caught it. I think it was might have been over Orgy, might have been over Monty Rice. I can't recall I off the top of my head, but it was a really nice hands catch. And you've seen him just kind of flash every practice. Now we've only had 3 that we've been able to watch. So, take that with a grain of salt. But I think that the running back position is a lot more wide open this year than it's probably ever been, or not ever been, but then it's been in a long time, in the sense that, Kendre is a guy that I'd like to see step into that role, but we'll have to see. Again, like, just kind of like Jake, this isn't the offense that drafted him. So maybe his skill set isn't what they're looking for on the offense, and you can find something else. I'm not saying that he can't, but I am saying that he didn't get any first team reps today. Jordan Mims got one. So he's a guy that I'm interested in. And I don't think Jamal Williams is concrete in that role either. He's going to have to compete for that job. So, of all, I went in kind of looking for a running back that I felt like could give themselves a chance to make this roster. And I think he's that guy right now. But again, there's no Alvin Kamara. So I'm impressed with anything right now at the running back position. Once Alvin gets here, I feel like things will feel a lot different.
Okay, maybe a Haener to Mims connection to watch in the preseason come August. We'll see about it. Jeff, let people know where they can tune in for your latest work, whether it's podcast interviews and reports for Odyssey. What you got going on?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Jeff_Nowak. WWL.com is the website. I host a podcast with Steve Geller called Inside Black and Gold. I'm going to do a live episode and shortly here on the WWL Sports YouTube channel. And I also host a show with Steve Geller on WWL Fridays 4 to well, it's supposed to be 4 to 8, but it's almost always 4 to 7 because there's stuff going on. But yeah, check that out. Call in. I always appreciate when people call. I think people forget you can call into radio stations these days and have conversations. But if you're sitting there on a Friday night being like, I want to bitch about something, sorry for cursing. Call in, text Steven, figure it out.
Do not apologize. On Sundays after games, there's usually a couple of words flying around here. So, Jeff, thank you so much for coming on. I greatly appreciate it, man. I wish you all the best, and hopefully we'll catch up soon.
For sure, man. Thanks for having me.
Once again, guys, that was Jeff Nowak. I love Jeff's work. I think Jeff is great. And I think this is the time of the year, as he mentioned earlier, to be optimistic. We got a lot to talk about, whether it's the quarterbacks. And I'll still kind of gloss over everything that we talked about for anyone who may have missed it. We'll get into it. So if you're listening, guys, make sure to smash the like button. We greatly appreciate that here at Boo Crew Media. And also, if you have any comments, put them in, and I'll get to them in just a couple of minutes. Before I do that, I just want to kind of, like I said, go over some of the things we talked about. We talked about Spencer Rattler and his struggles. And I think for Spencer Rattler, I think Jeff kind of hit the nail on the head. And I said this before, and a couple of weeks ago, I said if Spencer Rattler wins the QB2 job this year, that's fantastic. And I know some people said, yes, that's you're accurate. And other people are like, man, I want him to be QB1. And I don't blame fans for wanting Spencer Rattler to eventually be the starting quarterback. But man, it is so hard to go from college to the pros. It just is. It is in every sport, particularly in the NFL, when you play the toughest position at quarterback and you're dealing with guys flying 100 miles an hour at you, and they're bigger and stronger and faster than any of the guys you played in your life. So for Spencer, he is struggling right now. And while that is unfortunate, it's part of it. You know, I remember for Jake Haener, we heard good things about him in practice last year. Then he struggled a little bit in the preseason. And I thought, man, like what happened? And then, you know, we had to kind of have a reminder that it's the NFL and you will get humbled at certain minutes and you'll have to learn and adjust on the fly. And for Spencer, the beauty about this is a rough May right now. June might be better. July might be better. And he might get to the point where he could end up being their starter eventually. I just don't see it right now at the moment. And that's okay because A, the Saints are going to start Derek Carr this year anyway. And B, Jake Haener's another guy who the Saints took who had a very good college career. And if one of those guys looks like a very good backup this year, that's a win for the Saints. And if one of those two guys, whether it's Rattler or Jake Haener, becomes the starter of the future, which, again, we do not know, that would be great for the Saints. It doesn't have to be one or the other. I don't care who it is, you know? So Rattler is struggling right now, but that is normal and that's okay. And I hope Saints fans understand that because this is not the number one overall pick. This is not a guy who they invested so much draft capital in. You're taking a chance on a really talented player and you're hoping eventually he hits. But that is not something that needs to develop right away. So I hope Spencer gets better, but we'll see what happens. As for the defense, I talked about it with Jeff before. Tanoh torn Achilles. Now he's out indefinitely because it's May, right? If this happened later in the year, he'd be out for the season. Although I do think he probably is out for the season at this point because, man, I mean, if he comes back before the season ends, what a recovery. And I know medical science and modern science in general is just way better now than it was before, so I won't rule anything out. But to Jeff's point, and I agree with him, and I mentioned it, you are putting so much pressure now on a defensive line that I do think is talented. Like, I think there's this misconception between Saints fans that the Saints don't have talent on the defensive line. They do have talent. Chase Young is very talented. Carl Granderson is talented. Peyton Turner is talented. Isaiah Foskey's talented. Brian Brzez's talented. But Chase Young, is he going to be healthy? I don't know. He's coming off neck surgery. That is not a sprained ankle, even though sprained ankles, obviously, as Drake once said, are not something to play with. This is a legit concern. Chase Young's neck injury is a concern. Peyton Turner, contract year, so yeah, the motivation will be there. But man, motivation doesn't mean anything if you have shit luck when it comes to injuries. And unfortunately for Peyton Turner, that man's got terrible luck. So he's got to stay healthy. Isaiah Foskey, great at the college level. I'm not even going to say good. I'm going to say great at the college level. I don't know what he is yet. I hope he's good. I wanted him to get drafted by the Saints, so I hope he is good. But we do not know. And I hope for one of those guys' sake, they ball out. Because I think Carl Granderson's a starter. Who is going to make plays opposite of him? That is the question. And I don't have an answer at the moment. Hopefully we get one. Hopefully we do. Now, I mentioned before with Jeff, and I don't know where Saints fans are at with him, but Derek Carr so far, and again, it's early, right? Derek Carr is going to say the right things for the most part. For the most part, sometimes he doesn't say the right things. But fans care about production. And I think more than any other sport, the NFL is all about what have you done for me lately? And are you playing well? And everything else is kind of irrelevant. And sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. For Derek Carr's case, I think his particular situation is he's got to play well. And Saints fans aren't going to give a shit about what he is as a person and what he says off the field if he's not playing well. And if he is playing well, they also won't care because all they'll care about is the stats. And I think for Derek, again, look, it is early. OTAs is not indicative of training camp, and training camp is not indicative of what you do in the regular season. Derek Carr, though, and I said this a couple weeks ago, he is not as bad as he played in the beginning of the year, and he isn't as good as he played at the end of the year, right? Because 12 touchdowns to 1 interception is wild, but that's what he did in the last 4 games of the season. He was great. So can you find a middle ground? Can you be consistent? And this is the moment to do it because I think, A, you have a new offensive coordinator in Clint Kubiak who should make life a little bit more easy for you. But more importantly for Derek Carr, and I mean this as hopefully a motivator and not something to crap on the guy. This is it for Derek Carr. If he does not look good this year, I do not think there's going to be an NFL team out there that is going to be willing to pay money for Derek Carr, but also say you are definitely a starter. And that's not me saying Derek Carr isn't a starter. In a league that has 32 of them, he is a starter. That is not a question that needs to be answered. And if you think otherwise, I think you're just hating a little bit too much, but I get the frustration. But for Derek's standpoint, he's got to play well this year. Because maybe the Saints don't see him as their future, but if Derek Carr goes out there and has 28 touchdowns and 9 interceptions, and the Saints go, 10-7, Derek Carr is going to make sure he's playing as a starter for at least another 2 years. Because that's how it works in this league, man. You buy yourself time. And Derek is running out of time to buy himself more time. So the pressure's going to be on, and pressure's good. You either thrive under it or you melt under it. And I think for the Saints' perspective, they're going to get an answer. Either Derek's going to help them keep this ship afloat and buy them more time to eventually get the QB of the future, or this season's going to end and they're going to go, you know what, man, that was one of the worst contracts we've signed. And we'll see where it lands. I would imagine it'll be somewhere in the middle because I think Derek Carr is, for most of his career, somewhere in the middle when it comes to ranking quarterbacks and how he plays. So I'm glad Derek looks sharp right now. I'm glad Derek looks efficient. I just hope he can do it on Sundays because just like most fans, that's what matters to me. Are you playing well on Sundays? And if you're doing that, most of us forgive all the other stuff. Most of us don't care about the other stuff. And, when I hear Derek Carr speak, he sounds like a great guy. But if you're a great guy and you're throwing the ball to the other team, I don't care. Like, that's just the way us NFL fans are. Like, and if you don't feel that way, you're probably lying to yourself. So that's kind of where I'm at with Derek. I think the talent's there. I think the offensive system is going to be more, I'd say, conducive to the way he plays. But is he going to step up? And we will see. So before I get into your comments, guys, whether you have questions, thoughts, hot takes, whatever, and I'll pull them up in just a second, I want to get a quick word from one of our sponsors, Crystal.
I need to clear something up about New Orleans. While our culinary scene might be on fire, our food has never been about heat. It's always been about flavor. And this is how New Orleans does flavor. Are we clear? Crystal. How New Orleans does flavor.
What is up? Back into the Straight Up Saints podcast. And I want to thank Crystal, as always, for being part of the program. I'm going to get into whatever comments you guys have today. I know it's a little light on comments, so we'll kind of get through these. It's a breeze. And then we got NBA playoffs tonight, so I guess that'll be how I'll spend the rest of my evening and probably a little WNBA. So we're going to get a question or a comment from Pablo. He says, I just hope this is another case of the Saints doing well during OTAs, training camp, and the whole offseason program to only disappoint once the season starts, especially with Carr. Look, I hope that's the case as well, Pablo, and I think that for the Saints, their regular season schedule is not going to be easy, right? Yeah, you play the Panthers week 1, but nothing's guaranteed in this league. And even if that was guaranteed, you had to play the Cowboys after. You got to play the Eagles and the Falcons and the Chiefs. And before you know it, you're like, man, that's a gauntlet through your first 5-6 games. So I hope that they're able to just be a competitive team and they don't just stumble out of the gates because it could get ugly. It could really get ugly. And I think for fans, we all want to buy in. But you can't buy in if they start off 2-4, 2-5, whatever it may be. Chase says Derek Carr is good. I mean, I think he's okay. Look, I'm never going to be that guy that sits here and tells you Derek Carr sucks. He's the worst quarterback in the league, blah, blah, blah. Like, I might say he sucked during a game. I might say he played terrible. But I don't think he sucks. But I also don't know if he's good. I think he's somewhere in the middle of the pack. And if he can be middle of the pack this year, the Saints will, for the most part, be competitive. Chandler says, who dat? Glad to see these two working together. If you're talking about Jeff and I, then I do appreciate it. I really do like Jeff. I think Jeff does really good work. And if that's something you guys like to have more Saints reporters on, I would love to do that. I think that they offer another insight. And I'm usually kind of revved up to a 20. So to have someone who's more mild-mannered and calm and can present it in a different light, I'm all for it. So if that is something you guys absolutely like, I would love to keep doing it. And guys like Jeff, look, I'm an animated guy. I know there's far more knowledgeable people than me, and Jeff is definitely one of them, so I'm glad to have him on. Justin to Get Me Cash says, go get Trey Hendrickson now. I think that's a fun idea, especially since the Saints need defensive line help. Is it a smart idea? I think it all depends on where you view this Saints team. If you don't think that the Saints are a contender right now and you don't think they're a move away from being there, don't get Trey Hendrickson because it's going to cost you both draft capital and financials. So that's what I would say. If you see it on the other side of things, then I would say go for it because Trey's that type of player that puts you over the hump. But I don't think the Saints are in that spot. So for that reason, I would say no. But I can't knock the suggestion. I mean, Trey's an awesome player. Hey, guys, I just want to say this new offense we're running this year might not be so new. Look back to 2018 offense and the concepts of our offense last year. I want to say 49ers stole our offense. LOL. I mean, look, I think the NFL, which I love, everyone just copies each other's homework and tries to twist it. And some people make it work, some people don't. And the frauds get exposed, and the guys who are manageable and able to adjust to different elements of this game, they thrive. So we'll see. Is Clint Kubiak going to be a guy that's going to thrive and adjust to what the game throws at him? We're going to find out. And I love that aspect of it. I absolutely love that aspect of it. I'm going to need Carr to look at Drew from 2018 and how he ran that offense. I do agree with that part. I think being efficient is important. What I will say about Drew that just can't be replicated is Drew valued every possession, which matters. And Drew is just such a smart quarterback. And this isn't for me to say Derek Carr's dumb. Because again, Derek Carr's way smarter than me. But Drew knew where a defender's going to be before the defender knew. And that matters. And as much as Derek Carr might have a stronger arm than Drew, what's up here matters more than anything else at that position. And Drew just processes at a level that we don't see. Not anymore, I'll tell you that much. So I understand your sentiment. And I do agree with that. Running the football more, being more efficient, keeping the chains ahead, staying ahead of the chains. Those are all things that Derek Carr could work on. And the Saints can help him out with. But Drew just has that kind of sixth sense. And that sixth sense is knowing where everyone's going to be defensively. T Dirty says, I'm still holding my breath with Carr. Yeah, I feel you. Look, part of me just wants to say he is who he is, and that's it. The other part of me goes, but what if he has a bounce back year? I don't want to put all my eggs in that basket. I don't want to get too excited about that because that's how you get disappointed. But that's kind of where I'm at. I'm somewhere in the middle. Forgive says, I feel like people underrate going from Pete to Clint. I feel like a lot of teams had Clint as the number one option as their OC. Now the Saints get him, and people think they get even worse. Why? Here's what I would say for your point. As for the getting worse, I think the Saints from a record standpoint can be worse than last year's team. I don't think they'll look worse than last year's team. And the reason I mean that is the Saints had a very easy schedule last year. And I think if they had a better offense, they were a more complementary football. If they played more complementary football, they would be a better team. They would have a better record. They would look better. And I'd feel a lot more confident about what they were able to do. But they didn't do any of those. They didn't check off any of those boxes. So I think for the Saints, they might look better this year. The record might be worse, though, because I think they have a tougher schedule. I mean, you got to face the Cowboys. You got to face the Eagles. Got to deal with great quarterbacks like Mahomes, Stafford, Justin Herbert. So the schedule's not easy. It's not easy. So they might be worse in terms of, standings. But I think in terms of how they look, I do agree with you. I think they're going to look better. There are times last year where that Saints offense was an absolute joke. I don't expect that to be the case this year. And if it is, all right, Saints are going to have to overhaul everything next offseason. So be it if that's the case. But that's where I'm at. And I do agree with you, though. I do feel like people are underrating it. And we got to be fair as fans. A lot of us said when they were going to get a new OC, we would love if they get Clint Kubiak. And now they get Clint Kubiak. Let's give the man a chance. Let's see what he can do before we say, oh, it's not going to work. So it's up to him to make it happen. We will see if he does make it happen. But he's got time. It is almost the end of May. We're going to get into June before you know it. And week 1 will also be here before you know it. So we'll see what happens with the Saints, guys. But I think right now, a couple things to just really quick recap. No Tanoh puts pressure on the D-line in terms of depth. Quarterback right now, Derek Carr obviously is your starter with Jake being the clear number 2 at the moment. And then in terms of the offensive surprises, look out for Jordan Mims. And then even Michael Jacobson, former college basketball player turned tight end. Maybe he could make a sleeper move up the depth chart because tight end might be a position of need. But that's something I'll cover in a later podcast episode, either later this week or next week as well. But hopefully later this week, we got more to talk about with the Saints, and I can get more guests on for you guys to get more Saints knowledge from them. But guys, that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. I want to thank you guys as always for tuning in, leaving your comments, liking, subscribing to the channel. We appreciate all that here at Boot Crew Media, and we really do value what you guys have to say. So thank you so much, guys. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Tuesday night. Have a great rest of the week, and let's see what happens. Saints news never stops, and because of that, we'll have it covered for you here on the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for the Who Dat Nation.